I'm Matt Mattus. I want to say I'm a longtime member of Tower Hill and New England Botanic Garden, but I kind of go way back to the 1960s because I'm a lifetime gardener and I've always enjoyed gardening and growing plants and exhibiting them at Horticultural Hall in Worcester back in the 60s again. So I am definitely a gardener deep in my soul. My childhood was always deeply involved with plants. My parents were both gardeners. I lived in Worcester, in southern Worcester on the border of Auburn and Millbury, and we had a big garden. Funny thing, I still live there. So I bought the house from my parents. And it was my grandparents' house. It was built in 1906. So there's a lot of history. It's like living in a park. And so I grew up in this environment of having to weed the garden and kind of hate gardening at first because you were cheap labor. But also as you grew older, you realize how magical and wonderful and like, what a gift that was. My mom canned vegetables and grew flowers for the church, and my dad was a big vegetable gardener, so we were just deeply involved with the garden. So I remember the smells of the garden, raking, the hard labor, the fun parts, just as young as I can remember. So definitely a long-time gardener. I remember going to Horticultural Hall. I must have been 4 or 5 years old, sitting on my dad's shoulders. I had to be that small, so it was probably like 1964. And I remember it was for the spring flower show, and he carried me on his shoulders up the sidewalk on Elm Street, and I could smell the hyacinths coming in from outside. And I knew what hyacinths smelled like because my parents grew them, but this was, February. And snow on the ground. I remember how magical that was. And I remember walking down the big aisles of Horticultural Hall and all the tulip displays out. And this is just, before I was in kindergarten. And I don't remember going back after that until maybe I was 7, 8, or 9 years old. I would wander the city because you could do that back in the early 70s. And I think I was at the Galleria and grabbed an Orange Julius and then walked up the hill and passed by this building that the scent of lilies were coming out the door, and there was a sign that said Lily Show. And I remembered the place, so I don't remember how I came into the library, but there's a big stairway, and it's a daunting building. It looks like a university. And I walked in, and the woman invited me in. She said, "You want to come see the setting up for the Lily Show?" And I went in, and it was the library, and all these people were stuffing lilies in vases, and I had lilies at home. And I just was fascinated with this. And before long, she gave me a pamphlet. I think it was a schedule of premiums that I could enter if I wanted the next show, which I think was the Daylily show in 2 weeks. And I remember telling my parents, I want to enter because I'm growing marigolds and there are other kids with marigold displays in there. And that's exactly what I did. And, within a 1-month period, that became my Little League. I was competing at these summer flower shows. By the next year, I was taking out the park and burpee seed catalogs and thinking, now I'm going to order this and I'm going to order that because I wanted to compete, or I want to order all the marigolds, or as many vegetables that I could grow. And I had a corner of my parents' garden, and I started growing things to compete. So that's how I became really involved with the sport, if you will, of horticulture. And Horticultural Hall became, my Fenway Park. I remember at Horticulture Hall being such an integral part of, say, my junior high years. That's when I was really I was a professional competitor, if you will. But I couldn't drive yet, so I had to beg my dad worked nights at the Telegram and Gazette as an artist, but I would ask, can I get the station wagon? Can we get my Uncle Joe to drive the station wagon so I could load it up with plants? Because by this time I'm entering, a potted herb display, and I had a homemade greenhouse at this point, so I'm growing herbs to compete with the one other kid who was the same age as me, and we were very competitive, especially with potted rosemary and how many herbs could you grow in pots and then exhibit on tiers. So you learn how to exhibit before I even knew that people in England were doing this, for 200 years. I was a Future Farmers of America. I was an agriculture student at Burncoat, and there was a work-study program that you were offered to take, so you could leave school in April or March and go work at a landscape firm or a nursery. But my instructor said, I have a special job for you, but you need to go on an interview or two before you get it. And it was for Helen Stoddard. This building's named after Helen Stoddard. and she needed a gardener. She had a full gardening staff, but she would also take occasionally an agricultural student to work. So I ended up working for her for 7 years in the summers as a gardener, and really that was better than college, and to work in a Fletcher steel garden that was designed for a horticulturist who had the means to really build it, and still is a very important garden and a very important part of my life. So I learned so much there. But Helen Stoddard was also a trustee and a huge patron of Worcester County Horticultural Society. I was in college by the time I heard that they were looking at moving, and I was still working part of my winter breaks or summers at Horticultural Hall in Worcester, painting the rooms. And so I was a little upset that they were moving, but also very excited. And Mrs. Stoddard asked me to be on this sort of committee to tour the different locations we were looking at purchasing, which, was it going to be Sturbridge Village or a few other pieces of property. And I remember driving up here on this hill, and I think all of us were blown away that at that time it was just a farmhouse and a barn, but a magnificent view. And it just looked promising, and then it became very exciting. I did imagine someday this would be like I thought like the Atlanta or Montreal Botanic Gardens in my head. And I imagined huge glass domes and all these magnificent gardens with a view in the background. So that was the first time I heard about moving here. And then I went to college for 8 years, and I really wasn't a member of that involved. So when I came back, it already had transformed now into a garden. No buildings yet, no conservatories, but the gardens were being planted, and I already knew the staff because they moved here and they were all my friends. So that was very exciting to see. There was no place here in the early years to exhibit, so we would use the town hall in Boylston to have our displays. So it was, again, it felt like we're part of a small town, and we would all drive up here for meetings, but then we would drive to have our plant shows at the town hall. And I don't think anyone felt like, well, someday would there be exhibition halls here? Would there be other buildings? And there weren't many gardens at that point. I think the lawn garden was being landscaped at that point. So it was, and it was landscaped very young, so trees were 40 feet away from each other and they were small. So it felt like, okay, this is going to be a garden, but what else is here? So I think a lot of people in the Worcester County area would come here for the big plant sale in June, and that's when it would be crowded, and we'd all park in the lawns and get stuck in the mud. But it was so much fun because all the vendors were here from all the plant societies, and that's when you started to feel like this could be something. So when I think about why the move to Tower Hill was important for the Worcester County Horticultural Society I think it's a bigger answer. It was important for American horticulture, if you will. It's great to be in a building in a city that looks like a museum with paintings of old men with beards, and a library, which was gorgeous. And yeah, I do miss that part of it, that sort of institutional part. But beyond that, what was the society? It was the people who, I think at that time, a lot of people were, wealthy people with gardeners. And then things changed where everyone gardens now, or we all want to garden. And it's much more than just gardening. It's where can you go to be peaceful, or that Zen moment, or for a walk in the forest, or forest bathe, or see beautiful gardens landscaped in many, many, many styles, whether it's a French formal garden, or a wildflower garden, or an Asiatic woodland garden. Now we can, I think now we see it made a lot of sense, but it took a lot of vision back 40 years ago to think how do you reframe and rebuild a society to be more than that? And back then, I think 40 years ago, we weren't thinking of botanic gardens as museums of plants or collections of plants or a scientific institute, or even as a beautiful landscaped destination. Today we know that it's all of that and more. When I think of the value that a botanic garden brings, I think there's a lot of answers to that, right? It depends on how involved you are with plants. Maybe you have no interest in plants. Maybe you just need to get to an outdoor space. So I think fundamentally, that's so important for children, first of all, because unlike my childhood, unlike my childhood, you can't go and walk through the woods alone as a kid, and here you can. So you can walk and see, dead trees and wildflowers and birds, and it's a safe place to go do that. So I think that's one box you can check. And then there's so many, depending on what you want to get out of the entire place. I mean, you go to a museum, everyone takes something different away. You might want to go to the contemporary galleries, you might want to see sculpture, you might want to see paintings, or you might just want a quiet moment alone to walk through and see beautiful images. So in that type, we're offering that here. It's a little bit of everything or a lot of everything, and everyone takes something different. As a plant person, I still want to see horticulture, and I want to see inspirations that might inspire me in this beautiful space here. I mean, I was just taking photos of plants I want to add to my greenhouse. So I'm looking for that rare and unusual plant that I want to experience in my own space. But I also know not everyone wants to do that. I think the orchid show here is a great example of people come here and say, oh my gosh, this is spectacular. And for some of us it might be, but they're just regular everyday orchids you see at the supermarket, right? But then the horticulturist is looking at, no, there's some rare ones. Look, there's that. So we all pick out what we want to see and we take something from that. So I think a Botanic garden offers it's some beauty, it's some art, and then it's some science or botany. So that balance, I think we'll always have to have here, but you need to offer something for everyone. And now I'm seeing that happen here. So that's, a great successful path to be on. So when I think of how the garden has deepened my interest in plants, it's almost the other way around for me. Because, I'm on the board and I'm a horticulturist. And it's almost again like a museum where I'm working at a museum, but I'm also an artist. Right, so you have very different perspective. So I feel like my role here is to help or connect with those, maybe it's the staff members, horticulturists, the CEO, whoever, who are also plant people, and encourage and motivate and push them to, let's get a rare tree, let's get a collection of chestnuts in the forest, let's add those things that I think are of value and they all think are of value, so that the visitor and the guest that comes here is delighted and experiences joy. In a world where everything's changing, we need to keep things fresh and new, but we're also educating and inspiring. And the design team here, the horticulturist team here, the gardeners are doing amazing jobs laying out plants, and every year they need to put on the best light show and the best orchid show and the best planting scheme, and I'm seeing that come to fruition now, and it's just beautiful. So it's like not even being like a creative director, it's just maybe being a cheerleader and saying, yes, let's go there. Let's do something delightful next year. And go do it. So I feel like that's part of my role here. So what I hope the future of the garden will bring is continued growth. Again, with the master plan, and master plans change over time, but I hope they just get better and better every 5 or 10 years you revisit it. But I want to see, more greenhouses. I want to see more learning spaces, more gardens, and a team that works here that's so passionate, and like they are now. But let's go 10 times more. As we grow. And I'm still saying we, because I feel like I'm part of this family of this garden. But I want to see the growth, and I feel the energy now. There's this synergy happening. I want to see more buildings, more gardens, and an even greater respect for the nature around here as we acquire more land and build a very special place.